Hi, this is Dr. Kimberley Linert, and you're listening to Incredible Life Creator Podcast. I'm the author of Visualizing Happiness in Every Area of Your Life. And today, my guest is Mr. Stephen Wing. Now, Stephen Wing was a missionary kid who grew up overseas. Re-entry to the United States as an adolescent was rough, but a summer camp experience canoeing in the Canadian wilderness got him through it. Those trips every summer became his sanctuary, and the wilderness is still his spiritual center wherever he is. In college, Stephen discovered hitchhiking and graduated without a plan in his head except to travel the country. He majored in writing, but became a poet when he realized he could write about things that actually meant something to him, which at that point was hitchhiking, rather than as kind of an intellectual game. Letting go of destinations and deadlines, Stephen found that life has its own innate intelligence and would teach him what he needed to know if he released the need for control. After 12 years on the road, Stephen met his wife, Dawn, and settled in Atlanta. He worked as an editor and recycler, got involved in political activism, organized interfaith gatherings to celebrate the equinoxes and solstices, and eventually started leading seasonal workshops for poets, each time in a different nature preserve or green space around the city. That led to the publication of Wild Atlanta. Welcome to the podcast, Stephen.
Thank you, Kimberly.
Yeah, so excited to have you here and hear your stories because I know you have some good stories. So why don't we start out by, just telling us how you started out and how you got to be doing what you're doing now?
Well, I've always been a writer and a reader, and pretty much in college, I really discovered I wasn't that good at anything else. So that became my focus, and I discovered after graduating from college that it was fairly easy to get my writing published as long as I didn't care about getting paid. There's lots of opportunities out there to share that skill in meaningful ways. So that became my chief contribution as an activist in several different aspects of my life. I always found that played a role. Now, in when I began working after I met my wife and settled in Atlanta, I found not only writing but speaking when I was coordinating the recycling at my company, which is a book wholesaler. I found that my skills were valuable to help educate people about why to recycle in addition to how. And that interest kind of broadened um, to I started writing articles for the local free newspapers, the free monthlies in town, and basically trying to give people a new perspective on the environment and their role in the ecology. Um, I found it was helpful to get people out of the rut of their normal way of thinking about these things and just coming up with new angles to introduce the concept of um, playing a conscious part in the ecosystem, which we all do more or less unconsciously, but waking people up to the fact that we are part of nature and we are a kind of a critical part at this point um, in history as things are rapidly unraveling out there in the natural world. And so much depends on people waking up and becoming conscious participants in the ecosystem around them, uh, learning their, developing a relationship with nature, a personal relationship with nature, which is what um, indigenous people have always had. The nature around them, the animals and plants, even the the stones and the trees were all considered part of their family, part of their community, and that's what kept things in balance. So bringing back that awareness is a key part of what I'm doing as a writer. And since I retired from my money earning work, I've more or less gone full time into that. And the publication of this book, Wild Atlanta, has kind of opened up a new world to me in trying to promote the book. I'm having to seek out opportunities to speak, to read poetry, to do more workshops. It sort of forced me out of my comfort zone. I got a grant from the city of Atlanta to publish the book,
Mhm.
which was a kind of a natural fit because it's about the nature preserves of Atlanta, which are many, and trying to encourage people to make use of those and make them part of their life. So, but once I got the grant, I had to go through with it, publish the book, spend the money, and then start trying to market it. And that has been very eye opening and led me into all kinds of unexpected connections and relationships. So I'm just really grateful for being there, not really having planned it, but making the most of it.
Mhm. Exactly. You know, you never know how things work out. I was actually researching for something else, and I saw your website, and I said, "This is cool. I need to call these people who wrote this book and have them on the podcast." So it's just so funny how thin those threads can be that
Yeah.
connect us. And I'm
And
just
that's
so
a good
glad that
example
Mhm,
because you mentioned my co-author, who's a photographer, and we met at a fundraiser, a musical event where there was loud music playing,
mhm,
and we could barely hear each other. And of course, it was kind of dark; we couldn't see each other that well. But we were talking, and I found out she was a photographer, so I described my project because the poems. I had written the poems as I went along. I'd been doing these workshops for 10 years every season. And each time I come back with at least one poem. And I realized that it was a natural book project, but it really needed those photographs. So
mhm,
she had never seen my poetry. I had never seen her photography, but that project kind of lit her up, and so she began going to all the places where I had been and bringing back these pictures. And that's what really made the book special is the combination of the words and the images. And that was, as you described, so totally accidental that it could not have possibly been an accident.
mhm. I don't believe in accidents. I think everything is preordained somehow. So,
Well,
but
that's one thing I learned from hitchhiking, that there's no such thing as luck. It's all grace, or synchronicity, or whatever term you want to use. But like you said in my introduction, life has its own intelligence, and as long as you're not trying to stay in control, of course you have a responsibility um, to control your impact on the environment, for example, or your impact on other people, but you still are not totally in control, and you've got to allow those synchronicities to get in there through whatever crack they can find.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, but I interrupted you.
No, no, that was perfect. So actually, I wanted to talk about hitchhiking. So, you know, I've never hitchhiked, but I know there's a lot of people that they have hitchhiked across the country, across Europe. Um, Tell me about that time in your life.
Well, if I was ever depressed, all I had to do was catch a bus over to the interstate and stand on the ramp, and it just immediately lifted my spirits. It's such a free existence, getting everything down to the size of a backpack that you can carry. Even though I left so much behind in my parents' basement whenever I did this, and for a while I lived in a little house that my parents owned in the woods of Georgia. But it's such a free feeling, and not just physically, but also spiritually, because you're opening up to the universe, and you can't um, you can't have a deadline. You can't even necessarily have a destination because the world may have other ideas, and you always had to be open to other possibilities. Somebody would come along and offer you a ride someplace, and you'd think it over. Um, and maybe the place I was going, I would get there a little bit later, but it's just a detour on the way. So there's no reason I couldn't, follow that whim. Usually, occasionally, I had a more of a deadline situation, getting home for Christmas or something like that.
Mhm.
But I just found it taught me so much because I met people I needed to know.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard stories I needed to hear. I learned things I needed to learn from other people's experience. You don't have to have all the hard knocks yourself if you're open to listening to other people's stories. And often those people needed someone to talk to, or someone to keep them awake, or someone to take the wheel for a while. And quite often they would uh, feed me a meal, buy me lunch. I have a book of hitchhiking poems. When I finally settled down, I realized I wasn't probably going to do any more hitchhiking. So all the poems I'd written on the road, I collected in a book called Crossing the Expressway.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a line in the introduction uh, about a free ride, and quite often it comes with a free lunch.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not totally true that there is no such thing as a free lunch, but there always is an exchange. Even a temporary friendship with someone you're traveling with is still a relationship. There still is an exchange. You still pay for your ride in some way, but it's not all. The world doesn't run entirely on cash, and if you look at nature, uh, there's a lot of reciprocal relationships out there that are totally outside the human world of transaction and exchange.
Mm-hmm. For
So
sure.
I recommend it to go out in nature and learn other ways of relating.
Exactly. And is there, when you were doing your travels, is there any any people that you continued connecting with after you had that trip together?
Well, I'm kind of anal about hanging on to people's addresses, but I'm very bad at actually staying in touch. I
Okay.
still have a lot of those people's addresses, but I'm sure they've long since moved on. We're talking in the distant past here, but there was one fellow who picked me up, and it was before I lived in Atlanta, but he was going to Atlanta, and he gave me a ride here, and I ended up becoming friends with him years later. In fact, he started coming to my workshops, my earth poetry workshops,
Mhm.
and became a good friend. And of course, that's a total accident, if you believe in accidents, but I can't say that I deliberately kept in touch with all those people. I did. A lot of my travels were visiting people I knew from college who had fanned out across the country, and it gave me um, someplace to stay sometimes, or an excuse to go somewhere that I was curious about. But I was always careful not to tell them I was coming because I didn't want to end up somewhere else and have to explain, which was, I realize now, was not really fair on my part.
Mhm.
And usually they didn't mind, but often their spouse didn't like a surprise visitor showing up. And now that I have a spouse, I totally understand. So
Mhm.
I hope those people have forgiven me.
Uh-huh. Yeah, as you're talking about the hitchhiking, there's a song, I'm trying to remember the name of it, by Jack Johnson, and it's talking about a train and all the stops it's making along the way. And he's kind of wishing that the train doesn't get to where it needs to go. He just likes to enjoy the stops.
Uh-huh.
He's enjoying the journey so much, and he's enjoying the stops along the way and the people he's meeting, that he just wishes the train would just keep going
Hmm.
and
Yeah,
keep stopping. And I wish I could remember the name of it, but it's just a great song because it gives you a chance to reflect and to actually go deep and meet people and get to know them and experience something totally different.
unexpected. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard this quote before. It says, "What I'm seeking is somewhere I've never been yet. I've never
Hmm.
been before." And we don't even know sometimes what we're seeking because we haven't been there. So we can't even visualize it. We think we know
Yeah.
where we want to go, but we don't always know where we want to go.
Well, that's a good metaphor for writing because um, some people actually sketch out what their steps they're going to take, and they outline the whole piece they're going to write. But other people work like I do, just one step at a time, just following it to see where it goes, and that works much better for me, especially with poetry. Um, uh, I think a lot of teachers of poetry and poets who write about it will say that the ending of the poem should be as much of a surprise to the writer as it is to the reader, and that's the most fun kind of poem to write.
Mhm. Yeah. So, talking about poems, do you have your book there, the Wild Atlanta book, with you?
I do.
Um, Maybe you could give us a sample of some of your poems and what to expect when we get your book.
Sure, that would be great. I'd love to get this book on more coffee tables. It's a coffee table book, an oversized paperback,
Mhm.
because every page has color photos, um, and photos you want to be able to see them really well. And this is the first poem in the book. It's called "The Hospitality of the Trees," and I wrote it for a place in Atlanta called Bush Mountain. As soon as you step into the woods, everything changes. The hot asphalt, the glare of sky, the houses and lawns and cars fade and dissolve into twilight and ivy, a timeless quiet and the fragrance of decay. Even the whine of the saw down the street becomes a distant memory of elsewhere. Walking among the trees, you begin to remember something you can't yet call by name. The trail twists and climbs. Roots travel across under your footsteps, going their slow, perpendicular way. Dead leaves and sticks choke a dry, plunging gully, stranded where the last rain left them, suspended in time till the next one storms through. Your eyes roam hungrily from tree to tree, like any bird on its daily commute. A vine snakes up a skinny trunk and on into the leafy understory, the leafy heaven of the understory. Twin poplars stand joined at the base, one a tall, straight fountain of green, the other a rotting column of ghostly gray towering naked against the sky. A giant beech sprawls across the muddy stream, its splintered limbs still feeding a festival of spring foliage, of the black scar of an old lightning strike exposed at its root. A living breeze begins to stir inside your chest. Each tree speaks to you as in its own voice as you wander under the high branches, gazing up and around, listening through the hush. Every leaf whispers something you can't quite make out. Where you came from, perhaps. A long forgotten way to live. Who you are in this moment unfolding softly underfoot, step after step. Maybe even who you were all along. Maybe someday I'll read a poem without messing up in the middle.
Well, that was beautiful, really. So beautiful. I mean, with your poems, you take us right into the scene. It made me feel so part of all of that. It's very opening.
I'm glad it did the trick. It's kind of a magic trick in a way.
Yeah, yeah. It was really beautiful. So,
Thank
so
you.
you go and visit these places, and then as you're visiting, you're creating these poems about what you're seeing, what you're feeling.
Yes, it's almost like having a conversation with my surroundings. If I go with another person, I'll be having a conversation with them, but the key to it is being by myself in that place and just really getting entering a deep relationship with that place, even though like a ride when I'm hitchhiking, it's a temporary relationship. It's not the length of it, but the depth of it. And I just scribble down notes, and when I come home, I try to make them into a coherent way to communicate that to another person. But what I write down in the woods is usually not very coherent. It's a two-step process of bringing it home and um, sitting with that material and working it and reworking it till it makes some kind of sense to another person.
Well, exactly. And you're using all the different senses. You're using the visual, you're using the auditory, you're using the kinesthetic, the feeling piece of it with the words. So that makes sense that you would make notes, which would be the cognitive piece, but then have
Right.
to go home and feel or put into words all the other things. Because you're taking the
Yeah.
visual, you're taking the feeling and the sound. You're trying to put that just into words, which you do beautifully.
Well, thank you. I also write fiction and I write essays. And I find if I'm writing a lot of poetry or one of those other things, the more I do it, it kind of wears a groove into my brain where those sensations from my senses will, that part of my brain will just translate them into poetry, usually just little fragments that if I'm careful and quick, I can write them down and save them to work on later, with a different part of my brain that puts together the pieces and tries them in different configurations and tries to make them coherent. But it's that the key thing is that the more I write in a particular genre, the more my brain skips the part of that takes effort of translating sensations into rational phrases.
Mhm.
It's like when you have a craft, like playing the guitar, which I could never do. Your fingers learn to do it without your brain really being involved. So the more you can get that rational faculty out of the way and you have a direct connection between your ears and your fingers, on the keyboard of a piano or the keyboard of a computer, you get that rational faculty out of the way and it flows, directly from one to the other without the intermediary having to translate everything.
Mhm. Yeah. Would you like to share one more poem? Is there any other ones you'd like to share with us?
Yes, thank you. I did pick out two for this, and this one is um, less from the individual perspective than from the group. And this one is from a place called Glen Creek Nature Preserve in Decatur, which is a suburb of Atlanta. It's called Hatchlings. Humans clustered together in a clearing can hardly help sitting in a circle facing each other. Splitting up to wander, they tend to stick to the paths left behind by human feet. But all around this leafy congregation in the midst of the city, a vine-covered chain-link border links the houses like a chain of human hands to guard their lofty green neighbors against the world of chainsaws and backhoes, jet planes and power plants. A litter of crumbling brown corpses softens the steepness of the slopes. Above them, soaring limbs spread feathery green wings around the hatchlings of human hearts, clustered in a clearing, following the paths, awakening for the first time, perhaps, to the responsibility to preserve, if we can, the life around us that preserves our own. You
Beautiful.
can tell I'm a missionary kid.
Uh-huh.
It just really through.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah. But that is really wonderful. So, um, when you walk into nature and you have this, ability to kind of change the nature into words, but when you walk into nature, what is your experience? How are you feeling that oneness with nature?
Well, I don't have any kind of enlightenment experience. Mainly, I'm just noticing the details because, um, especially in this area, one patch of woods is pretty much the same as the other. But each time I go in, I have a different experience, and I notice different details. So if you go through the book, the details are what really distinguishes one place from the next, and it kind of, like we were saying earlier, it leads you to a different place, that you're not expecting. It's like I mentioned I'm a missionary kid, and um, pretty much my life of activism is a life of service because that's what brings me joy. And all of my siblings have that too, but in totally different ways.
Mhm.
Um, it's a giving back is such a intrinsic part of having a fulfilling life for me. Um, so I have a message in all my writings of different genres, because right now is a time when we can't afford to just we writers can't afford to just try to entertain people because that is distracting people from what's really going on. And
Mhm.
the same with when I read, I can't just read for enjoyment. I used to be a novel addict, and but when I wrote my own novel, I used those tools to craft something that tries to introduce people to the needs of nature, the relationship that we need to have with nature that's reciprocal, and to feed nature as it feeds us. So my poems don't consciously begin there as trying to teach someone a lesson, but that always creeps in by the end because it's such a vital need for people to overcome this separation, this fear of nature, this um, the need to protect ourselves from nature and live in an air conditioned space, and nature is through the window or maybe just through the TV. And that is what is really endangering us all because the reciprocal relationship is missing. So I do have a mission as a poet, but I write all kinds of poetry. I write love poetry. I write political poetry. I don't try to dictate what my poems will be about, but since that's such a part of me, it always leaks through the need to awaken people to that um, relationship that's so dysfunctional in our society. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, you did. And then that brings another question, which is, okay, being reciprocal with nature. What what do you see is our responsibility, our, it's not even the word I want to say, our responsibility, or how can we be one with nature, be reciprocal with nature? Because I know is I want to preserve nature. I don't, you see people building everywhere and there's sidewalks in so many areas, and you think, oh, where are the trees going? Where are the animals going when all these buildings are happening? So what do you mean when you say be reciprocal, and what should we be doing?
Well, there's so many ways to connect with nature, but the key thing to remember is that nature feeds us. We can't create life. Um, we can't replace the ecosystems we're destroying. The agriculture that feeds us, it totally depends on this miracle of the germination of a seed. And there's all kinds of technological inputs applied to that process, but we haven't yet succeeded in inventing something totally synthetic to eat. And even synthetic materials like plastic, it all comes from the earth, from the elements that are here. And um, we just need to be as more and more aware of the reciprocal relationship already exists. It's what feeds us. But if we're not feeding it in return, then we have diminishing returns. They're scraping the bottom of the ocean and catching tons of fish at a time, and that's just not sustainable. And in a way, sustainability is no longer a worthwhile goal because um, it's time for radically altering the systems that keep us alive. That the supply chain from nature to our table, our plate, has to be reimagined. And this is another key thing is um, it takes so much imagination to really understand how ecosystems work, how we can't remove one species and expect it to continue to function,
Mhm.
and to imagine what the consequences might be, and apply the precautionary principle because we just don't know enough. There's so little imagination, like what it's like um, to live in a place like Pakistan, which is bearing the brunt of climate change when we are the ones who caused it through our lifestyle. Um, there's so much the entertainment that we are used to is it's like taking the place of imagination.
Mhm.
Children can play a video game that is programmed for them, but that stunts the imagination. And imagination is just so important for children and for adults to really understand, since nature is way out there. Going there is such a great um, catalyst for imagination, um, because it eliminates that distance and puts us face to face with where we came from, and that is still genetically programmed into us. Biophilia, is, scientists call it, and there's a thing called forest bathing that they do in Japan. It's actually prescribed by doctors because scientists are just beginning to understand how nature feeds us, not just literally, but um, just being in nature boosts your immune system, and they're identifying the mechanisms, how it the specific substances that plants release, that we evolved as a species um, relating with these substances, and having our immune system um, in relationship with theirs as part of the same ecosystem. So it's I'm not describing it well, but there's a lot of scientific literature coming out now, and we are destroying these forests even as we're learning how valuable they are, not just for us, but to regulate the climate of the planet. So scientists are they have a great respect for imagination because that's how they create their experiments. That's how they create their hypotheses. And scientists have leaps of imagination all the time, like the discovery of DNA and the discovery of relativity. Those were intuitive leaps that the scientists made with their creative faculties because they had been deeply pondering these issues, and the answer just comes in a dream sometimes or in the bathtub.
Mhm.
So imagination is something that I'm trying to cultivate. I'd like to work in the schools and work with children and adults, trying to introduce the importance of imagination.
Yeah, that is so true because our kids are playing inside when they should be outside. And I know, I work inside a lot of times during the day, but like at lunchtime, I'll go for a walk. It's so
Mhm.
important for me to go to that walk in the park. I need
Yeah,
to be
and
by the trees and there's a little brook there, and on the other side there's a lake. I mean, it's in Gainesville where I was working, so there's a lake on one side. There's this little trail, and I don't know about other people. I need that. I need to go
yes,
and be in the sun and see the trees and like I'm kind of like Lutz. I take pictures of everything. I take pictures of bugs or animals. I saw a muskrat one day, birds.
uh,
I take pictures of flowers because it's just another way of like enjoying. And but it is so healthy. I don't feel as good when I don't take my walk.
well, I should be following your example. I need to get out more too.
So, yeah, so I wanted to ask about recycling. So I know the basic things to recycle. I mean, we recycle our plastic and paper and glass, but I mean, when you talk about doing recycling, what are you telling people about that?
Well, the main thing I'm telling people is that recycling is a last resort. If you absolutely have to buy something in a container or a package, it's best to avoid any kind of packaging, but especially plastic, as much as you can. And but once you've purchased that, the responsible thing to do is recycle it. And luckily, we have a lot of A lot of municipalities have curbside recycling that recycle the basic things,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a lot of things that don't fit into their system. They're single stream recycling, it's called, because the recycling that gets picked up at your curb goes to these big plants, massive plants, where they have giant machines that scoop it up and put it on a conveyor system and sort it out. So there's a lot of things that don't that system can't handle, and but plastic bags are a big thing, and most grocery stores will take those, and we hope they will recycle them. The thing about recycling is that it's kind of like healthcare. It's a for-profit industry. So if something can't be recycled at a profit, it won't be recycled.
Mm-hmm.
So if you live in a big city like I do in Atlanta, there's more than likely places to recycle things that a small town person may not be able to recycle. But it's like healthcare. It really is far too important to be left to a system that has to make a profit from it. So it really should be subsidized. And in Europe and some places, they actually require the manufacturers to take back their packaging or even their products for recycling at the end of their lives. And that would really go a long way to encouraging companies to be more responsible. It's like in a lot of things, the free market is only half of the equation. The government has to step in and make sure that they are acting responsibly rather than just in their own interests, in everybody's interests. And that's a tall order in the United States, where the companies tend to regulate the government instead of the other way around. But lately, we've had some strides in that direction, and right now there's an international treaty that's being worked out to eliminate single use plastics, uh, single use plastic containers and shopping bags and things, and that's actually been accomplished in certain countries. The UK recently banned single use plastics, certain kinds, and certain states have that. So it's like we're making slow progress on that front, but in the meantime, the plastic industry is just gearing up to triple their output, um, partly because they make plastic out of petroleum, and they can see the writing on the wall. The fossil fuel industry is kind of its back is against the wall, and so the companies that drill for oil are looking for other markets for their petroleum. So really, recycling is only part of it. The bigger part of it is really pressuring the politicians and the candidates to make this a priority, um, to basically to regulate the corporations who will do anything for a profit, including destroy the climate that has sustained life, especially human life, for so many millions of years. They're really pushing the envelope there, and we're in big trouble on the climate front, as people are discovering in places where all of a sudden their whole life is disrupted by a storm or a flood or a hurricane or a wildfire. It's like those people are awakening the hard way, but we need to be pay attention to what's happening with them and really starting to press the political system um, to respond responsibly. So it's really up to us. They're not going to do it on their own. They're getting plenty of pressure from the other direction.
Mm-hmm.
So that's it's the key thing is for people to um, shift their perspective from being a consumer to being a citizen, taking responsibility for what the next generation is going to inherit. And we need to be able to look them in the eye and say we did what we could. We'll see where that gets us.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But recycling is still important. If you bought it, you got to recycle it.
That's right. So I want to switch to a different question, different topic. You do these rainbow gatherings. What is that? What do you do?
That's funny. I just finished writing an article about it. It's dear to my heart because it's an attempt to create an alternative universe right here on Earth in the United States. Well, actually, rainbow gatherings happen around the world,
Mhm.
but it started at the end of the '60s when the people who had this utopian vision in the summer of love, they realized that there in the city, even in San Francisco, they really couldn't create their vision because of all the counter forces, the commercialization, the police, the street drugs. There was all those things were blurring the vision. So they had the idea of taking it to the woods, and they did the first gathering in 1972 in a national forest in Colorado,
Mhm.
and it was centered around a prayer for peace on July 4th.
Mhm.
And lo and behold, 51 years later, this is still happening every July the 4th. And an immense circle, thousands of people in a meadow in the forest praying
Mhm.
for peace. And it's a morning of silence in the camp. And the silence is broken by a children's parade.
Oh, man.
And for quite a while I was employed and paying off a mortgage, I didn't really get to go to the gathering every year, particularly once I realized I couldn't, in good conscience, um, fly there in an airplane, since often they're in different states out west. But I went back a couple of years ago after my retirement, and it's just as magical as ever, although the people that started it are now old and gray or even gone.
Mhm.
But this younger generation is picking up and carrying it on, and it's one of the few things you can say that about. So many things I'm involved with, the gray-headed people are wondering where the young people are that are going to carry it on in activist movements and other things. But but this particular thing is still going on in spite of really um, nasty resistance from the authorities who try to outlaw it in different kinds of ways. But they can't seem to stop it. Um, so it's primitive camping.
Mhm.
You have to hike into the woods and set up your tent. But once you get there, everything is provided. There are a couple of dozen kitchens or more, providing free food run by volunteer labor. Everything is paid for by passing the hat, and it's if you grow up in this society, everything is based on money, and it's impossible to comprehend that there's a way to live without money. So this gathering is so important to demonstrate that. And if it gets in the media, it was just portrayed as this nostalgia fest, like this fad that's over, but these people didn't get it. They think it's still a fad, and it's presented as sensationalized entertainment, but it's real. And if you think about it, I mean, the Colorado gathering, the 50th gathering last year, I think it was 10,000 people. And to get that many people out that far from a hospital,
Mhm.
and that far from a grocery store, and keep them all healthy and fed, it's kind of a miracle. But
Mhm.
what it is a lot of people who are dedicated to this vision, and they put in the sweat labor to make it happen. And it's really inspiring to see. And then after my third or fourth gathering, it began to sink in how it works. And then I started plugging in, putting my own energy into it. I can go there and create something, anything at all, to give away as long as it's free. Um, I can do a workshop, poetry workshop, or someone else could do a Tai Chi class. You
Mhm.
can do anything you can think of as long as it's nonviolent and free,
Mhm.
because money is not allowed. So anyway, I recommend it to anyone who can actually do primitive camping comfortably. You have to be able to tolerate those conditions to get there,
Mhm.
um, and you don't have to stay very long, but it's a magical experience.
Wow. So is it the authorities don't like it because it's so many people in one place, or why would they be against it? I mean, seems like praying for peace and being kind and giving to each other is a beneficial, wonderful thing. So why would people be against it?
Well, you have to give them their due. They are there to protect the forest. They also are involved in selling off the forest to logging companies at a loss, but they also are protecting the parts of the forest that are not being logged. I mean, a lot of our gatherings happen in cow pastures because they've leased the forest to a rancher. Out west, that's a lot of times the case. But um, you can see that that many people could do a lot of damage to a forest. The fact is that we don't do a lot of damage to the forest, not nearly as much as a rancher would do. And we have people that are dedicated not only to building the gathering, but also to tearing it down, disappearing every trace, recycling the trash. I mean, this is serious dedication that these people have dedicated their lives to this. And some of them have no other home than the rainbow gathering for a couple of months every summer. But the um, the authorities don't like it primarily because they're not in control, and that's because no one is in control. It's a national forest, belongs to everyone. No one can be the leader of this. It's totally decentralized. Everyone is their own leader, and that really freaks them out because they want one person to be in charge, and they can hold that person liable.
Mm-hmm.
And they have actually sent people to prison for refusing to be that one person in charge. Several people have done federal prison time, but they want someone to sign a paper and take responsibility. And the problem is, if you're signing that paper, you're taking responsibility for people who do not give their consent for you
Mm-hmm.
to represent them. So, and that was finally recognized by a court in a civil case. And ever since then, the permit regulation has kind of been on the back burner, but they harass us in all kinds of other ways, in as many ways as possible. And it's really interesting to see what will happen because the Biden administration is looking at basically decriminalizing marijuana. And even in states where marijuana is legal in the national forest, we're under federal jurisdiction. So that has been their excuse for a lot of the harassment. They've done lots of illegal roadblocks and things like that. And if that excuse were taken away, it would be interesting to figure out what kind of excuse they would come up with to harass people at the rainbow gathering. But it's basically a clash of two cultures,
Mm-hmm.
and they are the armed protectors of the money economy, the society built on money, and they don't like this example of another way. And this goes all the way to the top. It's Republican, Democratic administrations. It comes under the Department of the Interior, the U.S. Forest Service, and they not only don't understand it, they don't want it to spread. They don't want this example to be noticed. They want people to be afraid to go to these gatherings because of the harassment. So anyway, it's a really interesting social experiment, a microcosm of the conflict between the old world and the new world that's trying to be born. Because people all over the world share these values, share this dedication to nature and cooperative living, to equality. At the gathering, there are rich people there are poor people there. You can't tell them apart. They all have got a tie dye on,
That's right.
and they're all equal because they all eat for free. They all contribute what they can contribute.
Mhm.
It's a wonderful thing. And of course, it has its problems and issues, and there are people that part of their dedication is to watch over us and keep people safe, deal with predators or criminals that are hiding out in the crowd. And we have, not me personally, but these people have turned people over to the law who are, wanted criminals hiding out in our gathering. If
Mhm.
they've cooperated with the law enforcement people quite well, and with the forest protection people. I mean, it's we have a really good track record of cleaning up our sites, and we always make sure to get it in writing that this site was cleaned up to the Forest Service satisfaction. Um, so it's something that it's a microcosm of humanity. It has all the same problems, but it has a different way of dealing with them. Decisions are made by consensus, and it's based on the relationships, uh, human relationships rather than money relationships. I could go on and on, so you better stop me.
Yeah, well, yeah. So, do they only have that like in Colorado, or do they have it in different areas? So, like, we're both from Atlanta, but do they have it in Georgia? Do they have it in Michigan?
Yeah, it moves to a different state every year. At the end of the gathering, people sit down and talk about where the next year's gathering will be. It was in Georgia in 2018, and since it came to my state, I did something I always had wanted to do. I took all my poems that I'd written about the different gatherings, and I published them in a book, and I gave away the book at the gathering.
Oh,
I gave
that's
away 400
beautiful.
copies.
Wow.
I did a GoFundMe, and that was so much fun. That was like um, one of the highlights of my life was sitting there by the trail and just giving these books away.
Hmm.
Because a lot of the younger people, people have all kinds of misconceptions about it, and I wanted to give them kind of a boiled down version of the vision, the original vision, um, to counter whatever rumors they might have heard. Some people think it's just a party. People have all kinds of ideas, and of course, it is many things to many people. But the basic vision is to create this cooperative society as an alternative to what we live in and make it real, not just a vision.
Beautiful. That sounds really beautiful. So I'm going to switch gears here and just ask you a personal question. So, what gives you the most happiness and fulfillment in your life at this point?
Well, I really like being able to read my poems to people and keep them there in their seats and not have anybody walk out. In a way, I'm entertaining people. The purpose of poetry is to bring things to life through language, and not to lecture people, but to make it sparkle and make it resonate. And whenever I don't get a chance very often, I would love to be invited to do my poetry. The other day, a couple weeks ago, I did about a 45-minute reading, and people stayed, and that really made my day. I just don't get that opportunity very often, but I'm working on um, my whole goal. Marketing this book is part of the goal is to sell the books. I've got boxes in my living room, but the wider goal is to reach people with my message, to enchant people with the magic of nature as part of their lives, to lure people into that relationship, and give them a new perspective on life on planet Earth, what it's about. So it's reaching people. I'm really more of a hermit by preference, but my poetry, it I feel obligated to these poems to
Mhm.
get them out to people in whatever way. I send them to magazines. I have very bad luck with literary journals because it's not the kind of poetry I write. They don't publish the kind of poetry I like, because it seems to be so much of the poetry out there seems to be um, aimed at other poets, or English professors or literary critics. It's not really written to communicate. It's written to like impress people or confuse people, mystify people. It's like you have to. It's like a puzzle or a game they're playing to see if you can figure out what they're trying to say, or if they're trying to say anything,
Wow.
or just to entertain them with
Hmm.
off the wall concepts that no one ever thought of before. And I really think, even if I may be repeating what other poets have said, but say it in a new way, it needs to communicate with people. And even if I never meet this person, they're reading my poem somewhere, to create a relationship, reach them somewhere inside where they can relate.
Beautiful. So now, if people wanted to get your books, or know about you or connect with you, Do you have a website? How can they connect with you the best?
Ah, well, Wild Atlanta has a website. It's wildatlanta.net. And I have a website, stephenwing.com. And I spell Stephen with a PH. I don't know what you get if you tried it with a V. Maybe Google would connect you with it anyway. But anyway, part of what I'm enjoying about my website is it's giving me a chance to write essays, which I used to write pretty regularly for the local free newspapers. And it's called a blog, but it's actually an essay, giving my view of what's going on. I hope a unique view from a poet's perspective of what's really going on behind all of the craziness, the news cycle, um, trying to get deeper than that. And so my blog is one of my favorite projects. I'm writing one each month. I just, my September blog was about civility and how that is overlooked as the importance of treating one another respectfully, regardless of our other differences. That is, to me, the kernel of what civilization is about. The fact that people can be safe in the streets, um, and that's something that's not true for everyone, but it's something that we need to aspire to as the goal of civilization. It's not to pile up possessions or control other countries' governments. The goal should be again, those relationships are the most important thing. Even with a stranger we're passing in on the sidewalk.
Mm-hmm.
And other things on my website, I did a video of one of my poems. My poem about climate change is called "Washed in the Hurricane," and my nephew is a videographer. We did a video together, dramatizing that. And I also have a free ebook on recycling, and I also have descriptions of the different workshops and talks that I'm available to give, and I can give poetry readings on different themes. So all that is on there, stephenwing.com, and I'd love to get a visit for many of your viewers and listeners.
Yes, definitely.
I can tell they're an elite crowd. That's must be the social elite who are tuned into you.
No, I don't know. I hope I have a little message for everybody. That's why I have so many different kinds of guests, because hopefully if you don't resonate with this person, you can resonate with that person. That's the idea, is to be a place where people can come and they can find something useful, something inspiring for them.
Yes, well, inspiring people is really key, um, because there's so many distractions, so many fears, anxieties. Um, People need to be inspired before they're going to make a move and break out of the rut
Mhm.
and aspire to something at a higher level.
Exactly.
Desperately needed.
I think so too. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today and for sharing all your wisdom, and learned some amazing things from you. So thank you so much.
Well, the world is an amazing place, so keep interviewing people. You'll never stop learning.
That is for sure. So I have one last question before we complete. What is your best advice on living an incredible, amazing life?
My best advice, I would say, again, um, focus on relationships more than possessions, and especially pay attention to um, the birds, the animals, the plants, the trees that don't have a voice, but they're speaking to you anyway and easily overlooked. But they are part of life. Life is a web. It's a network. All the trees and the plants are connected underground by the mycelia um, that are the actual body of the fungus that connects everything. Pay attention to connections. Look people in the eye and connect with them. A homeless person on the street, anyone you're able to get close enough say hello, establish that relationship in the first, because it may be the only second that you are in contact with them, but build that web of relationships by every means you can.
That is wonderful advice.
Because we are a community. Life on Earth is a community, and that's what's been put in at risk by the culture of individualism. It needs to be balanced with community, and people crave that. So offer it to them. Say hello.
All right. I love that. Thank you so much, Stephen.
Well, thank you, and thank you for that wonderful smile. Just
Mhm.
keep sharing that. That's my advice to you.
Thank you. We'll talk to you again soon.
All right. Thank you, Kimberly. Have a great afternoon.